By the end of this video, you will know the most important verb conjugations in Spanish so that you can have 80% of the conversations that you want to have. So make sure to stick around to the end because I promise you, if you stick around to the end, you will know how to speak in the future, present, and past tense in Spanish. Buckle up, this is going to be a long video. Please give it a like, it really does help me out a lot. And without further ado, let's jump in. Here we have ir plus a plus infinitive. This is what we call the informal future in Spanish. And in Latin America, this is how we speak in the future tense 95% of the time. You may have heard of something like hablarás or comeré. This is what we call the simple future. However, we use it more often in Spain. Don't get me wrong, we do use this in Latin America, but 95% of the time, we are just using this basic formula to speak in the future tense. Arguably, this is the easiest pattern or formula to learn in Spanish. So here I have the present, but as a bonus, I also added on the preterite and imperfect. So the present is how we're going to speak using the informal future. So we have voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, which is only used in Spain, and van. Okay, so yo voy, tú vas, él, ella, usted va, nosotros vamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes van. And then also vosotros vais. I really don't teach vosotros that much because I personally don't use it. However, if you are learning Castellano, which is the Spanish coming from Spain, then you should learn this. Okay, so that's it right there. In order to speak in the future tense, you've just unlocked the first part, right? You need to know voy, vas, va, vamos, va. I go, you go, he, she, usted, you go, vamos, we are going or we go, and they go or you guys go. Okay? Cool. Now, for the preterite, we have fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, and fueron. I went, you went, he, she, or you formal went, we went, and they went, or you guys went. Okay? These are bonus, so we're just going to go through them quickly. And then the imperfect. Iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, iban. Okay? I was going, or I used to go. You are going, or you used to go, or you would go. The imperfect is very context dependent, and we're going to take a look at the imperfect later on in this video. Okay? Iba, he was going, she was going. You formal were going, or he used to go, she used to go, so on and so forth. We were going, we used to go. They were going, they used to go, or you guys used to go, or you guys were going. Now, once again, those are just bonus. If we want to speak in the informal future, all we need to do is use the preterite. Voy, vas, it's really the present. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vam. So, for example, voy a viajar por México. I'm just following my formula. I am going to travel around or through Mexico. Voy a viajar por México. It's really just that simple. Just following that formula. That's all you need to do. Okay, let's look at some more examples. ¿Vas a comer eso? Are you going to eat that? So, are you going to eat that? ¿Vas a comer eso? Va a cantar. He is going to sing. Now, notice how I don't have the subject pronoun. So, va could represent he goes, she goes, or you go, right? Usted va, for example. Va a cantar. Él va a cantar. He is going to sing. Vamos a ver. We are going to see. Vamos a ver. Van a cocinar. They are going to cook. And now, for the bonus ones, we can say something like, fui a ver la película de terror. Okay? I went to see the horror movie. Okay? Fui a ver. It's the same formula going on. Obviously, now this is in the past tense and not in the future tense, but you can see all we're doing is just following that basic formula. So if you know how to conjugate the verb ir in different tenses, like in the present, preterite, or imperfect, well, now you can start to plug and play, right? Just like we did here. The reason I put película in parentheses is because if we had already been talking about movies, I could just say, fui a ver la de terror, because I understand that you were talking about movies, and therefore you could just say, oh, ¿cuál película fuiste a ver? Fui a ver la de terror, for example. And finally, iba a comer eso. I was going to eat that. ¿Vas a comer eso? No. ¿Qué onda? Yo iba a comer eso. I was going to eat that, okay? Iba a comer eso, okay? That's the first one we're looking at. Informal future. All you need to know are these conjugations plus a, meaning to, and then plus an infinitive. So hablar, comer, vivir, beber, so on and so forth. Let's move on to the next conjugations. Now let's take a look at regular present indicative verbs. I know that sounds like a mouthful and it might sound a little bit scary. These are regular verb conjugations, which simply mean that these verbs follow regular conjugation patterns. A verb like ir, which we just learned, follows irregular verb conjugations. So it doesn't follow this pattern, even though it ends in ir. That's why we call it an irregular verb. Now, we're going to take a look at indicative verbs, which are simply verbs that are in the indicative mood. Once again, I know it sounds complicated, but it's not as tricky as you think. In Spanish, we have 3 different moods. The indicative, which is the one we use most. It's used for things of fact or things that are real. The subjunctive, which a lot of students freak out about, but it's just used for doubt or things of uncertainty. And then the imperative mood, which is basically just command. Okay? So we're going to be looking at regular verbs, meaning they follow regular conjugation patterns, and they're in the indicative mood. Okay? So here we have our conjugation tables. If you've never seen these before, these are the holy grail for learning Spanish verb conjugations. All you need to do is follow these patterns and you'll be able to conjugate any verb that you want, as long as it's not an irregular, okay? Or if it has a stem change or something like that. In this video, we're not going to take a look at stem changes or worry about any of that stuff. I don't want to confuse you because in this video, there's going to be a lot of information. So we're just going to keep it simple, okay? So for AR verbs, we have o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. Okay, I put ais here for vosotros. I don't really teach vosotros, which is why I excluded it here. Okay, but if you're learning Castellano, Spanish coming from Spain, then you can focus on that. Okay, so o, as, a, amos, an. So we have, that's for AR verbs. Okay, we're going to take a look at how to conjugate these in a second. ER verbs, very similar. O, es, hemos, en. So the only difference is now we're using an E instead of an A. And then for IR verbs, it's the exact same as ER verbs, except it's different in the nosotros form. So o, es, imos, en, okay, instead of hemos, okay? Something to be aware of is that in the present tense, the nosotros form is actually the exact same as it is in the preterite. So if I say, for example, nosotros hablamos, that could mean we speak or we spoke, depending on the context of the sentence. That is why context clues are so important in Spanish. Okay? All right, so there you have it. You have the verb X. Now, to conjugate a verb like hablar, all you need to do is cut off its AR ending. So for any verb, all right, that's an infinitive, meaning it's in its original form, right? So hablar meaning to speak, comer meaning to eat, and vivir meaning to live. AR, ER, and IR verb. Okay? So let's conjugate it. We're going to cut off the AR ending, and now we're going to add on the new endings according to our rule. So can you help me conjugate this? Let's do it together. Okay? Yo hablo, right? We're cutting off the AR, adding on the new ending according to our rule. Tú hablas. Él, ella, or usted habla, right? We cut off the AR, so now we have habl. We add on this new ending, so habla, okay? Nosotros hablamos. Vosotros habláis. Ellos, ellas, ustedes hablan, okay? Habla, all right? That's all we're doing when we're conjugating verbs. We just cut off those endings and add on the new ones according to our rule. Now, if you're struggling to remember these, it really is just a matter of sitting down, writing them down, and studying them. As time goes on, you will start to remember these like the back of your hand, okay? The song that I was taught in high school when I first started learning Spanish was O, as, a, amos, an, otra vez. O, as, a, amos, an, otra vez. Okay, that's a little song you can sing to yourself in order to remember these. Remember, this is for the present tense indicative. Okay, these are the conjugation rules for that. Okay, next, come. Okay, so let's conjugate that. Yo como, tú comes, él, ella, usted come, nosotros comemos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comen. For vivir, yo vivo, tú vives, él, ella, usted vive, nosotros vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes viven. Very good. You see, all it is just a pattern. And it's very important that we understand this because native speakers will often not attach subject pronouns to verbs. What I mean by this is someone won't say yo hablo. They will just say hablo. Or they won't say tú comes. They will say comes. Okay? That's why understanding these tables is so important. Okay? So let's look at some examples. Trabajo todos los días. So, trabajar means to work. It's an AR verb. So, according to our rule, I cut off the ending and I add the new one. So it's trabajo. I work. I work every day. Notice how I didn't need to put yo trabajo todos los días because it's implied because of how the verb is conjugated. Okay? Trabajo todos los días. How would I say you guys work every day? You guys work every day. How would I say that? Okay, take a second. Okay, you guys or you all would be ustedes. Ustedes trabajan todos los días. What about they work every day? Okay, they work. We'd be ellos, once again in this form, trabajan todos los días. Okay, what about she works every day? Okay, ella trabaja todos los días. Once again, it's just plugging and playing. That is why it is so important to memorize these. All right? ¿Qué haces? ¿Qué haces? Now, this literally can translate to what do you do? However, more often, this means what are you doing? The reason I put this here is to let you know that sometimes native speakers will use the regular present indicative to talk about things that are happening right now. I could say something like ¿Qué estás haciendo? Which is literally what are you doing? However, ¿qué haces can also be used. You'd also think about when you say something like ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás could mean how are you, but it could also mean how are you doing? Okay, there you go. So ¿qué haces? All right, let's take a look at this side of the whiteboard now. Si llega Juan, salgo. Si llega Juan, salgo. So here we have llegar, an AR verb. We're talking about Juan is doing the arriving. That's the third person singular. So we say si llega. And then we have salgo. Notice how the conjugation is irregular here. We're not going to go over that in this video because otherwise it's going to be way too long. But I have other videos about it here on the channel. Or as you click the link in the video description, you can get access to all of this info in my Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Okay? Hace 3 años que espero tu llamada. Okay? Now, here's a weird one. When we're talking about time that is passed on, we can use something like hace, meaning ago. So 3 years ago, I have been waiting for your call. So you could also translate this as it has been 3 years that I've been waiting for your call, or I've been waiting for your call for 3 years. Notice how, once again, the present indicative is taking on that idea of an ing verb in English, okay? So something that's happening in the near future or right now, okay? Quiero unos tacos, okay? Once again, notice how this changes here in the stem. Quiero unos tacos, all right? I want some tacos. And here, when we're ordering, we could say something like me da or me das unos tacos, por favor. Could you give me some tacos, por favor? This doesn't translate, super well into English, and a lot of people think it sounds rude. It's not rude at all. This is a very common and normal way to order in Latin America, especially in Mexico. So you could say me da, which is a little bit more formal, me das, which is slightly less formal, but they're both polite, okay? Me da unos tacos, por favor, okay? The big thing to remember here are these conjugation tables, and we use this just like we would in English, okay? So the idea being, I work, you laugh, they cry, we do, so on and so forth. Okay, now let's take a look at the past tense in Spanish. Okay, now let's take a look at the preterite. Remember that in Spanish, the most common ways to speak in the past are using the preterite and the imperfect. Here is the one thing you need to remember about the past tense. The preterite is for one-time actions in the past, whereas the imperfect is for ongoing actions in the past. Right now, we're going to look at the preterite, and then we're going to take a look at the imperfect, okay? So here are the conjugations for the preterite. Haste, o, amos, aron. That's AR verbs. Once again, we're just following patterns. Io, I, iste, yo, imos, vieron. Notice ER and IR are exactly the same. So I, iste, yo, imos, and vieron. Now, be aware, it is very important that you are pronouncing these correctly, okay? So when I conjugate a verb like hablar in the preterite tense, and let's say I want to say I spoke, right? So one-time action, I would say yo hablé, right? Hablé. Be careful. It is not yo, whoa. It is not yo hable, okay? It is yo hablé. It's subtle, but the difference is there. Now, I'm going to write it down real quick just so you can see. Okay, so here we have hable, which is the one I just said with no accent. And then we have hablé with an accent. Sorry for my chicken scratch there. But this is something important to know. In Spanish, when we have a verb, the natural emphasis on a verb falls on the second to last vowel. Okay, so remember, vowels are just A, E, I, O, U. So in a word like hable, right here is the last vowel, whereas a is the second to last vowel. So when a verb does not have an accent on it, the natural emphasis will fall on that second to last vowel, aka a in this case, right? So it'd be hable. Okay, whereas here with an accent, now we have hable. I always tell my students to kind of jump, right? Hable. Okay. Sometimes accents on words don't change the pronunciation, like in a word see, for example. See without an accent means if, whereas see with an accent means yes. The pronunciation doesn't change, but we understand the difference in writing due to the accents. When you're speaking with someone, you'll understand when someone is saying if or yes, depending on context clues. Okay, but here it is very important that you say this correctly, because if I were to say hable, it sounds like I'm speaking in the present tense subjunctive. For example, ella quiere que yo hable con ella. For example, she wants me to speak with her. That's very different from something like yo hablé con ella. I spoke with her. Okay? So that's the difference. Be careful, right? Same thing with here, right? It's not hablo, because that means I speak. It's habló, meaning he spoke, or she spoke, or you spoke. Okay? All right, let's conjugate comer together. All right, so once again, we cut off the ER ending and we add on the new endings according to the rule. So we have yo comí, tú comiste, él, ella, usted comió, nosotros comimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comieron. So how would I say you ate? How would I say that? You ate, okay? Well, it's tú, so we'd say tú comiste. Remember, the preterite is for one-time actions in the past. You were not eating. You did not used to eat. You ate, okay? The preterite is the idea in English of I laughed, we spoke, they did, we went, okay? Now vivir, all right? Same thing, same exact endings, right? Viví, yo viví, tú viviste, él vivió, nosotros vivimos, ellos vivieron, okay? So, looking at some examples, compré un coche nuevo. I bought a new car. I wasn't buying a new car. I didn't used to buy a new car. I bought a new car. It happened once. Once again, notice how I did not put the subject pronoun. I did not say, yo compré un coche nuevo. Why? Because I don't need to. I understand that I'm talking about yo because I have studied and learned these conjugation tables. If you're going to remember one thing from this video, let it be these conjugation tables, right? So for the present tense, the ir plus a plus infinitive formula, and then also the imperfect that we're going to take a look at, okay? Empezó a llover. It started to rain, or began to rain. Okay, it wasn't starting to rain. It didn't used to start to rain. It began to rain. That's that preterite. Empezó a llover. Okay? Now coming over to this side. Viví en España por 3 meses. Now, technically, I could use the imperfect here if I got rid of this por 3 meses. So I could say vivía en España, which is the imperfect. We're going to look at that right after this. Vivía en España would mean I used to live in Spain, or I was living in Spain. Whereas in this case, I want to say I lived in Spain. And because we have a specific time period, we are going to use the preterite. we'll use the preterite when talking about specific beginnings and ends. However, the easiest thing to remember when it comes to the preterite is that it is a one-time action in the past. So, viví en España por 3 meses, me levanté y me vestí, right? It's not levante, right? It's levanté. It's not vestí, it's vestí, okay? Me levanté y me vestí. I got up and I got dressed. These are called reflexive verbs. We're not going to learn about them in this video. If you want to learn more, click the link in the description to check out the Fluent Spanish Video Academy. You can learn all about reflexive verbs in there. And finally, nos hablamos ayer. We spoke to each other yesterday. And ayer gives us that extra context that this happened in the past. Remember, hablamos, depending on the context, could be in the present or in the past. Now let's take a look at the imperfect verb conjugations. All right, we're almost done. You've almost done it. Okay, this is the last thing we're going to talk about. Okay, this is the imperfect. Remember, this is for ongoing actions in the past. So here are the verb conjugations. Haba, habas, haba, habamos, haban. And ER and IR once again have the same exact endings. Okay, ia, ias, ia, íamos, ia. Ia, ias, íamos, ia. Now, when I first learned this, I was like, man, is this right? This sounds weird. It kind of sounds like Yoda or something. This is correct, okay? So, for an era verb, like habla, how would I say you used to speak or you were speaking? How would I say that? Okay? Tú hablabas. Remember, cut off the ending and add the new one according to the rule. Now, I've found that the imperfect can be trickier for students because the imperfect can take on many different translations into English depending on the context of the sentence, okay? So, tú hablabas could mean you were speaking, you used to speak, or you would speak. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of the translation of would with the imperfect because many times students confuse this with the conditional tense. For example, yo te llamaría, pero estoy ocupado. I would call you, but I'm busy. That's a conditional, but that is not this. So when using the imperfect, try not to use the translation of would in your head. Sometimes it's the best translation there is, but it's better to say something like used to or was doing. So, yo hablaba, I was speaking or I used to speak, okay? The general idea is that this is something that was ongoing in the past. Remember, the preterite is for one-time actions in the past, whereas the imperfect is for ongoing actions in the past, okay? So, comer, all right, let's conjugate. Yo comía, tú comías, él, ella, usted comía, nosotros comíamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comía. Okay, and for vivir, yo vivía, tú vivías, él, ella, usted vivía, nosotros vivíamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes vivían. Okay, there you go. So let's take a look at some examples. Comíamos juntos todos los días. We would or we used to eat together every day. Todos los días is what we call a trigger phrase. It lets us know this is ongoing in the past, okay? Every day is something that happened many times, not just once, okay? Comíamos juntos todos los días. We used to eat together every day. Or, cocinaba cuando me llamó, okay? I was cooking when he called me or she called me. It is very common that the imperfects will be going on and then the preterite will interrupt it, okay? So, I was cooking when he called me, okay? It's a very common thing. Now, notice how in the first person and in the third person, it's actually the exact same ending, right? Aba and aba, same thing with these two. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's exactly the same. So how do I know what I'm saying? How do I know that I'm talking about yo cocinaba instead of something like él or ella or usted? I don't. It's based off of context. If I just randomly said this to you, I would probably add on the yo there. But if you have prior context, then you'll understand when I say something like cocinaba, that I'm talking about me. Cocinaba cuando me llamó. Okay, so close. We're almost done. Okay, next. Eran las 2 de la tarde. When we're talking about time in the past, we'll use the imperfect. The idea is that this was ongoing, okay? You could argue that this was, was a time and it's over and it's done. But in Spanish, we're going to use the imperfect when it comes to time. Que eran las 2 de la tarde. Okay. Ella tenía 11 años. She was 11 years old. And once again, in Spanish, when it comes to age, we will use the imperfect. You could argue that she was 11 years for a year and then she wasn't, but in Spanish, we'll use the imperfect in this situation. Okay. Next, él era alto. He was tall. Notice how era is irregular, okay? There are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect. There's ser, okay, ir, and ver. Really, realistically, you only need to worry about ser and ir. Ser would be era, eras, era, éramos, and eran. And ir would be iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, iban. Okay? And finally, bailaba cada sábado. So I used to dance every Saturday, or I would dance every Saturday. Once again, because I didn't attach a subject pronoun, technically this could mean él bailaba cada sábado. This could mean ella bailaba cada sábado, or it could mean usted bailaba cada sábado. That is why context is so important in Spanish. Anyways, we've been at this for a long time. Muchas gracias por ver este video. Click the link in the video description if you want to join my Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Our goal is to help you have a 10-minute conversation in Spanish in 90 days without feeling nervous. Check it out by clicking the link in the video description. Muchas gracias y espero que tengas buen día. Hasta luego.